The chandeliers were crystal, the champagne was vintage, and the humiliation was right on schedule. I walked into the rehearsal dinner straight from a 14-hour shift, smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. My sister, Alyssa, didn't hug me. She turned to her circle of high society friends and smiled that shark-like smile. "This is Isabella," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "She does admin work at the hospital. Answering phones, filing papers. It keeps her busy." The guests chuckled. It was a polite, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. I didn't correct her. I just gripped a tray of canapés, so my shaking hands had something to hold. But Alexander, her fiancé, didn't laugh. He was staring at my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know he was holding. "Drop a comment, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I found a quiet corner near the bar, sipping water and wishing I could dissolve into the wallpaper. It was a skill I had perfected over 29 years. The art of disappearing. From where I stood, I could see my parents holding court. My mother, Christina, was laughing at something Alexander said, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She looked radiant, expensive, and completely funded by me. They didn't know that, of course. To them, their comfortable life in Boston, the paid-off mortgage, the deposit for this very venue, it was all thanks to lucky investments my father claimed to have made years ago. They never looked too closely at the bank transfers. They never asked where the money really came from. If they had, they might have had to admit that their disappointment of a daughter was actually bankrolling their entire existence. But facts had never mattered much in my family. Narrative was king. And the narrative was simple. Alyssa was the star, and I was the supporting cast. The admin girl. The one who needed help. The truth was a little more complicated. I wasn't an admin. I was the chief of neurotrauma at Boston General. I had graduated medical school at 22 and finished my residency in record time. I didn't answer phones. I rebuilt spines. I didn't file paperwork. I clipped aneurysms before they could rupture. My hands, currently hiding in the pockets of a dress I bought at a thrift store, were insured for $5 million. But my family didn't know that. Or rather, they refused to know it. There is a psychological concept called cognitive dissonance, where the brain actively rejects information that contradicts its established worldview. My parents had decided long ago that I was the slow one, the quiet one, the one who lacked spark. My success didn't fit their story, so they edited it out. I remember the day I got my board certification. I drove straight to their house, shaking with excitement, the certificate in my hand. I showed it to my mother. She glanced at it, smiled vaguely, and asked if I was dating any of the doctors yet, or if I was still just focused on books. She didn't see chief resident. She saw a dating prospect for someone better. She saw a receptionist with delusions of grandeur. That was the day I stopped trying. That was the day I adopted the gray rock method. It's a technique usually taught to victims of emotional abuse. The premise is simple. You become as uninteresting as a gray rock. You don't argue. You don't defend yourself. You don't share your wins, because your wins are perceived as threats. You don't share your losses, because your losses are used as ammunition. You become boring. You become safe. For 7 years, I had been a gray rock. When they asked about work, I said it was busy. When they asked about money, I said I was scraping by. I let them believe I was small, because being small was the only way to be safe. If I shone too bright, they would try to extinguish me. If I was just a rock, they would ignore me, and being ignored was the closest thing to love I was ever going to get from them. So I stood in the corner, watching Alexander laugh, watching Alyssa preen, and I let the lie sit heavy in the room. I was safe here in the shadows, or at least, I thought I was. Dinner was announced with the chime of a silver spoon against crystal. We moved to the long banquet table, a river of white linen and floral arrangements that cost more than my first year of medical school. I took my assigned seat at the far end, the designated spot for the least important person in the room. Alexander slid into the chair next to Alyssa, checking his phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He radiated a high-frequency stress that I recognized instantly. It was the look of a man whose vitals were dropping. "Sorry, I'm distracted," he muttered to my father, though his eyes never left the screen. We're closing the Boston General contract tomorrow, $45 million. It's make or break. My father, James, nodded gravely, pretending he understood the stakes of medical technology procurement. Big moves, son. Big moves. I kept my head down, unfolding my napkin. Boston General. He was talking about my hospital. He was talking about the contract that was currently sitting on my desk, waiting for my signature. The one I had redlined 3 times, because their cranial plating specs weren't up to my standards. Put the phone away, Alex, Alyssa snapped, playful but with an edge of steel. She turned her gaze on me, her eyes scanning my face like she was looking for a flaw in a diamond. She found one. God, Bella, you look wrecked. Dark circles much? It was a long shift, I said quietly. Alyssa laughed, a bright tinkling sound that drew the table's attention. Oh, please, it must be exhausting answering phones all day. Did the printer jam? Did you get a paper cut? My mother joined in, swirling her wine. You really should think about your skin, Isabella. Stress ages you. Maybe you should find a doctor to marry, like we keep saying. Then, you wouldn't have to work so hard, for so little. I looked down at my hands. They were resting on the tablecloth, steady and still. 6 hours ago, these hands had been inside a 12-year-old boy's skull. I had spent 4 hours removing a glioblastoma, the size of a golf ball, from his temporal lobe. I had stood in a sterile field, sweat running down my back, navigating around arteries thinner than a strand of hair. One slip, one tremor, and that boy would never speak again. I didn't slip, I didn't tremble. I saved his life. My cuticles were dry from the surgical scrub. My shoulders ached with a deep, muscular throb from standing over the operating table. I smelled like expensive soap now, but under that, I still felt the phantom weight of the lead vest and the metallic tang of cauterized tissue. I looked up at Alyssa. She was glowing. Her skin was perfect, thanks to the weekly facials I unknowingly paid for. Her biggest stress today had been choosing between the lobster bisque and the truffle risotto. That was the moment the reality of my family finally crystallized for me. It wasn't that they didn't think I was successful. It was that they didn't value the kind of success I had. They valued optics. They valued the shine. Alyssa was a spotlight, artificial, demanding, requiring constant energy to maintain. I was doing the gritty, bloody, necessary work in the dark. I dealt with merit. They dealt with marketing. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice flat. It's a very tiring job. Alexander looked up from his phone then. He looked at me. Really looked at me, his brow furrowing. You work at Boston General? He asked, his voice distracted but curious. Admin, right? That's right, Alyssa interjected, cutting off the oxygen to the conversation before it could breathe. She runs the front desk. Very important work, greeting people. I picked up my fork. The metal felt heavy and cold. I didn't correct her. Not yet. I just let the silence settle, heavy with the weight of $45 million and the signature they didn't know I held. The speeches began as the waiters cleared the salad plates. Alyssa stood up first, clinking her fork against her glass until the room fell silent. She loved this part. She loved having the floor. To Alexander, she began, raising her flute. And to us. They say building a marriage is like building a business. And look at what we've built. 2 million followers. A brand. An empire. The guests applauded. My parents beamed, their faces tight with pride. I watched my sister, bathed in the warm glow of the chandeliers, and I felt a strange, detached clarity. I used to envy her. I used to wish I had that magnetic pull, that ability to draw every eye in the room. But tonight, the envy was gone. It had been replaced by a physics lesson. There is a fundamental difference between a spotlight and the sun. Alyssa was a spotlight. She was brilliant, blinding even, but she was artificial. She required an external power source, admiration, validation, constant attention to exist. If you cut the power, she went dark. She was fragile. I was the sun. I burned quietly in the void. I generated my own gravity. I didn't need an audience to do my job. Whether people looked at me or not, I was essential. I kept the ecosystem alive. I sustained the very world she was posing in. Alexander stood up next. He looked tired, the stress of the pending deal etching lines around his eyes. To innovation, he said, his voice serious. To the future, and to closing the biggest deal of my career tomorrow. He checked his phone again. A notification lit up his screen. I saw his shoulders drop an inch. Relief. Speaking of which, he said, turning to my father with a grin. I just got the confirmation. Meeting is set for 9 in the morning sharp. With the hospital? My father asked. With the woman who holds the keys to the kingdom, Alexander replied. He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You know, it's actually funny. I've been chasing this meeting for 6 months. Her assistant is a bulldog. I finally get FaceTime tomorrow with the legendary Dr. Isabella. He looked at me then, his eyes crinkling with amusement. She has your name, actually. Dr. Isabella, last name. Same first and last name. Funny coincidence, right? Maybe she's a distant cousin. If she is, put in a good word for me. I hear she eats CEOs for breakfast. The table went quiet. Not the respectful silence of a toast, but the confused silence of a joke that didn't quite land. Dr. Isabella, my mother repeated, frowning. Is that a common name? Apparently, Alexander said, taking a sip of his wine. Though from what I hear, this woman is terrifying, brilliant, but terrifying, totally different from our Bella here. He winked at me. It was meant to be kind. It was meant to include me in the joke. I looked at him. I looked at the man who was about to marry my sister, the man who was betting his company's survival on a meeting with a woman he thought was a stranger. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug, but even that has a lethal dose. The camouflage I had built, the gray rock I had become to survive my family, it wasn't serving me anymore. It wasn't protecting me. It was insulting me. I decided right then that I was done being the rock. It was time to be the sun, and the sun doesn't ask for permission to rise. It just burns. The silence that followed Alexander's joke wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a room waiting for the punchline to land, not realizing the joke was on them. I looked at my water glass. Condensation was beating on the crystal, sliding down in slow, heavy tears. I picked it up, took a sip, and set it down. The sound glass hitting the table was soft, but in that vacuum, it sounded like a gavel strike. It's not a coincidence, Alexander, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a family that the surgery was complicated, but I had it under control. It was the voice of absolute, terrifying authority. Alexander blinked, his smile faltering. What? The meeting tomorrow at 9, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his. You're meeting with Dr. Isabella, last name. You're right to be nervous. Her assistant is a bulldog because I trained her to be. And you should know. I'm not just going to eat you for breakfast. I'm going to shred that contract, because your cranial plating alloy has a fatigue point at 30,000 cycles, and I don't put subpar metal in my patients' heads. The color didn't just drain from Alexander's face, it vanished. He looked like he was going into shock. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I reached into my clutch. My fingers brushed past the cheap lipstick, and found the hard plastic rectangle that defined my life. It was scratched. The laminate was peeling slightly at the corner from years of being swiped through security readers. It wasn't a shiny, pristine prop. It was a tool. I pulled it out and slid it across the white tablecloth. It spun slowly, a little plastic satellite, before coming to a stop right next to his wineglass. Dr. Isabella, last name, Chief of Neurotrauma. Boston General Hospital. Alexander looked down. He read the text. Then he looked up at me, and I saw the moment his world fractured. He wasn't looking at his fiancé's boring sister anymore. He was looking at the woman who held $45 million of his company's revenue in her hand. He was looking at the woman whose emails he had been frantically trying to decode for weeks. He was looking at the legend he had been terrified to meet, and realizing he had spent the last 2 hours ignoring her while she sat 3 feet away. You, he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a horrifying realization. It's you. You redlined the specs on the alloy density. I did, I confirmed. And I'm still not happy with the tensile strength numbers. Bella, stop it, Alyssa snapped. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the tension like a dull knife. She laughed, but her eyes were darting around the table, sensing the power shift and hating it. God, you are so embarrassing. Did you print that ID at Kinko's? Put it away. You answer phones. We all know you answer phones. She reached out to grab the badge. Don't touch it, Alexander barked. The command was so sharp, so sudden, that Alyssa actually recoiled, her hand hovering in the air. Alex? She said, her voice trembling with indignation. What is wrong with you? It's a fake. She's trying to ruin my dinner. Alexander didn't look at her. He couldn't take his eyes off me. He looked like a man who had just realized the bridge he was standing on was made of paper. It's not a fake, Alyssa, he said, his voice hollow. I know this ID. I know the security clearance code on the back. I know the signature. He looked up at my parents, who were staring at me with mouths agape, looking like fish gasping for air. You said she was admin. You told me she was a secretary. She is, my mother insisted, though her voice wavered. She just helps out. She's always exaggerating. I removed a tumor from a child's brain this afternoon, Mother, I said. While you were getting your hair blown out. I stood up. The movement was fluid, precise. I didn't need to make myself big. I didn't need to shout. I was the sun. Remember? I just had to exist, and everything else naturally orbited around me. I think I'm done with dinner, I said. I have a meeting in the morning. Apparently, the CEO has some explaining to do about his alloy specs. Alexander looked like he might be sick. Isabella, please. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. Ignorance isn't a defense in medicine, Alexander, I said coldly. And it's not one in business, either. The silence at the table didn't last. It shattered like a dropped scalpel. You're lying! Alyssa shrieked. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over, crashing onto the stone patio. You're lying. You just printed that to embarrass me. You're jealous because this is my night. Alexander turned on her, and for the first time, I saw the shark in him that made him a CEO. Alyssa, stop, he snapped. I know the clearance codes. I know the signature. This is real. He looked back at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. Isabella, we need to talk. Privately, about the contract, about everything. There's nothing to talk about, Alexander, I said, picking up my purse. You want to talk alloy density? Call my office on Monday, make an appointment. If my assistant thinks you're worth my time, maybe she'll squeeze you in. Isabella, wait! My mother scrambled up, her napkin fluttering to the floor. The pivot was instantaneous. The disdain in her eyes vanished, replaced by a frantic, calculating warmth. Darling, why didn't you tell us? We always knew you were doing important things. We didn't want to brag. We knew she was special, my father chimed in, his voice booming with fake pride. Always said she was the smart one, didn't I, Christina? It was fascinating, really. Watching them rewrite history in real time. It was like watching a virus mutate to survive a new vaccine. Stop, I said. I didn't shout. I just used the tone I use when a resident is about to cut the wrong nerve. You didn't know, I said, looking at my mother. You told me last week that I was wasting my potential. You told me I should marry a doctor so I could stop struggling. You didn't think I was special. You thought I was a resource you couldn't figure out how to mine. That's not fair, my mother cried, clutching her chest. The gesture was theatrical, practiced. After everything we've done for you? After the support? My heart condition. The stress is going to kill me, Isabella. Your heart condition, I repeated. I looked at my father. Dad, remember that VIP clinical trial Mom got into last year? The one that saved her life? The one you told everyone you got her into because of your golf buddies? My father froze. His eyes darted to Alexander, then to Alyssa. Now, Bella, that's not... I signed the admission papers, Dad, I said. I called the lead researcher. I pulled the strings. I cashed in favors I had been saving for my own career to get her a spot. You didn't get VIP treatment because you're important. You got it because I am. The air left the room. My mother looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The narrative she had built, that they were the powerful protectors, and I was the charity case, dissolved. "And Alyssa," I said, turning to my sister. She was trembling, her face blotchy with rage. "The venue deposit? The one Mom said came from Dad's bonus?" "Dad hasn't had a bonus in 5 years. I paid it. I wired the money to the planner directly so you could have your dream wedding." I pulled my phone out. I opened the banking app. "But I think I'm done being the silent investor," I said. "I'm done paying for the stage where you stand to mock me." "You can't," Alyssa whispered. "You can't do that." "I already did," I lied. "I hadn't yet, but I would before I reached the car." "I'm not admin, Alyssa. I'm the bank. And the bank is closed." I turned my back on them. I walked away from the table, past the frozen guests, past the crystal chandeliers, and out into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard Alexander calling my name, but it sounded like noise from a television in another room. I reached my car, a practical sedan, bought with cash, fully mine, and got in. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline dump. The post-op crash. I unlocked my phone. I found the contact for the wedding planner. I typed a single message: "Please cancel all pending payments from my account immediately." Authorization revoked. Then I found Alexander's number. Block caller. I found my mother's number. Block caller. I found my father's number. Block caller. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just put the car in drive and pulled out of the gravel driveway. The rearview mirror showed the estate glowing in the distance, a beautiful, expensive cage I had finally unlocked. I drove to the ocean. I parked and rolled down the windows, listening to the waves crash against the shore. The rhythm was steady, reliable, unconcerned with status or lies. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 29 years, my lungs filled all the way to the bottom. 6 months later. The office was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC and the distant wail of a siren, the city's heartbeat. I stood at the window of my new office, looking out at the Boston skyline. I hadn't signed the contract with Alexander's company. I signed with a competitor, a firm that prioritized patient outcomes over profit margins. They valued my red lines. They valued my no. I heard through the grapevine that Alyssa's wedding still happened, but it was different. The venue was changed to a hotel ballroom. The flowers were silk. The guest list was halved. Alexander was there, apparently, but the photos showed a man who looked like he was constantly scanning the room for an exit. My parents had tried to reach out through cousins, sending letters about family duty and forgiveness. I filed them in the trash, unopened. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, black, and bitter. I used to think that being the sun meant I had to burn myself out to keep them warm. I realize now that the sun doesn't exist for the planets. It exists because it is its nature to burn. If they wanted the light, they had to respect the heat. And if they couldn't handle the heat, they could stay in the dark. I turned back to my desk. There was a stack of files waiting. Lives to save, spines to rebuild. Real work. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was Dr. Isabella. And I had work to do. If you've ever had to cut off people who couldn't see your worth, share your story in the comments. You deserve to be seen.